and welcome to a quick discussion of Chrono Trigger. So this month, August 2020, marks the 25th anniversary of the release of Chrono Trigger in North America, so to celebrate I wanted to take a quick look at it and give my overall opinions on if it's still worth playing today. Spoiler, the answer is yes. So this is the DS version. I did not play the Super Nintendo version or the PS1 version. I didn't get into JRPGs until around the early 2010s when I started to play a lot of Final Fantasy games, and also this. I had dabbled in the genre with like Mario and Luigi, but I didn't become a real fan, like a really hardcore fan of the genre, until much later. So the original release, which was in spring 1995 in Japan and August 1995 in North America, was not released in Europe. So Europe would not get the game until the DS version. Even the PS1 version skipped over Europe for some reason. So all the versions have slight differences that are worth noting. The Super Nintendo version has a lot of fans because it had kind of an interesting translation. Being a Super Nintendo JRPG at that time period, if you've ever seen like Final Fantasy scripts at that time, you kind of know what to expect. So a lot of people find the original script to be really charming. I haven't experienced it, so I can't say whether I like it better or worse than this version. But the second major re-release was for the PS1. It added I think a few new FMV sequences, like animated cutscenes, at the cost of really, really bad loading times. A lot of games at that time, specifically Final Fantasies, because of having to transition in and out of battles, and in and out of menus, the load times are really bad. So a lot of people don't recommend playing like the Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger ports for the PS1. They were serviceable, but not ideal, just because it takes so much longer to get through them. Finally, we have the DS version, which is this version, obviously. Obviously, we have a map on the bottom screen. A lot of menu information goes down there during battles. But luckily, all versions of Chrono Trigger actually retain the original art style. A lot of Final Fantasies had drastically different art styles for the DS versions, so I'm really glad that for Chrono Trigger, they left the art alone. It's still that same pixel art style. The character portraits were done by Akira Toriyama, best known for Dragon Ball and also Dragon Quest. At this point, it would have actually been known as Dragon Warrior. And as a Squaresoft JRPG of this time period, it actually uses the active time battle system, but with some unique attributes to it. So in Final Fantasy, when you get into a battle, it would be a random encounter, and you transition into a separate screen. One thing Chrono Trigger does that's really cool is that battles tend to take place on the same screen that you enter the fight. So this is Gato. He's a robot that is fought for silver points that we can use around the carnival. He can counterattack, so the position of the characters on screen matters. We actually should attack more when he scrolls away, like so, because now he can't counterattack. So this is the active time battle system. When the ATB gauge fills up, then we can perform an action. By the way, there's also a Super Nintendo and DS version for the menu. I'm pretty sure on the DS version setting, more menu stuff is on the bottom screen. Obviously, the Super Nintendo option makes it more like the original. I usually go for that just because it's more traditional. But yeah, you can tweak active and wait to have it pause when managing text or your spells for this game. You have battle speed, all sorts of different options here. So yeah, a very robust amount of customization for this version, which will also become the basis of an iOS version. I don't know if it's also an Android. I would assume so, but I'm actually not sure on that. I'm not really an aficionado of Chrono Trigger. I like the game well enough, but I'm not like super knowledgeable about it. By the way, The phone version would also, I think, also serve as a basis for the Steam version, which is bad, apparently. Again, apparently, because I'm not really super knowledgeable about all the ins and outs of it. But basically, the Steam version had some really bad glitches because it was based on the phone version. Basically, like, menus and such were heavily based on a phone-based layout rather than a layout that works well on controllers. There's also a problem where one save point in particular is inaccessible because it's literally blocked off. It's really bad. By the way, this is a button mashing minigame. I'm not sure how well I'm gonna do on this. I usually do pretty badly. 7, not horrible. But yeah, I would definitely recommend the DS version if you had to choose what I consider the best version. The one downside of the DS version, and there is one downside that's kind of weird when you think about it. The DS version, in comparison to the Super Nintendo version, has bonus content. Normally, that would be like, oh, that's cool, more Chrono Trigger, right? Yeah, apparently all the bonus content is really bad. Like, I don't remember ever doing any of it because, quite frankly, I think I just got one ending and stopped, more on that later. But I never really pursued much of the side content. And yeah, people say everything added to the DS version is pretty miserable from what I've heard. So yeah, if you play the DS version, you are getting one of the best versions to play. Just maybe stick to the main story, or at least avoid the specific side missions. So this game is pretty easygoing for beginners. Like, it's not that long. I would say it's about 20 hours, which for a JRPG is pretty breezy actually. Most Final Fantasies at that time would take me about like 30 to 40 hours, like Final Fantasy VI was about 35 to 40 hour game for me. So overall, this is a pretty leisurely game if you're just getting into the genre. It's also pretty easy, like, despite the lack of random encounters, because everything's like a fixed encounter basically, I feel like it's pretty easy going in terms of level balancing. Like, I think it will be very rare that you'll find yourself feeling under-leveled, just because it's set up so well. Like, you really don't need to grind very much if you're just going for the main story, which is always a benefit. I'm actually trying to remember how to activate the next sequence. I legitimately don't remember. I think that was bad. By the way, there's actually hidden values here that if you perform certain actions, you can basically change an outcome later on, so that's kind of neat. Yeah, I legitimately don't remember how to progress. Again, not an expert. It's part of the reason why I'm only doing a one-off video and not a full Let's Play, because quite honestly, I'm not good enough at Chrono Trigger or knowledgeable enough to really give it the treatment it deserves, because it really is a well-made game. One of the best, probably. Like, easily one of the best JRPGs by Squaresoft at this time in terms of overall. I'm pretty sure a few things are still broken, because of course they are, but like Final Fantasy VI, as an example, is really, really broken. I love Final Fantasy VI, it's one of my favorites. I will not deny that the Super Nintendo version is a mess on a programming level, and that kind of drags down the overall experience, I'd say. But yeah, this is a pretty technically sound game, at least the DS version is. Again, I wouldn't know about all the intricacies of the other versions, sadly. The music is considered some of the best music. The presentation, I think, is really solid, even though, obviously, it's not like... You know, it's sprite-based, so it's not, like, on par with other, like, realistic games, but for the style, and I think in some ways, pixel graphics age really well, so again, I'm really glad they never went the Final Fantasy DS route and tried to change anything up. So yeah, definitely worth playing even now, especially if you can track down this version. I feel like the Steam version, as many horror stories as I've heard about it, it's probably still playable enough to be enjoyable, but it's just not ideal, basically. Yeah, how do you progress this? I legitimately can't remember. So yeah, we might not even get into another fight at this rate, or even another story event at this rate, because I actively can't remember how to get past to the town square. Like the sequence of events to activate the next story moment. Yeah, the music was done, I think, by Yasunori Mitsuda, best known for this game, but also worked on games like Xenoblade Chronicles, I think 1 and 2, and also, I think worked on Mario Party 1 and 2 of all things. I remember playing Mario Party 2 recently, and being kind of surprised. It's like, oh yeah, Yasunori Mitsuda did this soundtrack. I think Nobuo Uematsu also did this, worked on the soundtrack as well, so you can't really go wrong with the soundtrack. So yeah, from a visual and auditory standpoint, this is probably one of the best, like, Square Enix games, or Squaresoft games. Gameplay is actually really fun, honestly. It's a nice little change of pace, having even more of an active focus, I would say. For example, you know, in Final Fantasies, everything would feel very static, while this game feels very, dynamic with its fights because of things taking place basically in real time, at least visually, not going to a separate battle screen. Just generally, the lack of grinding helps a ton, and the general flow of battles is pretty fast. So yeah, it's a very snappy feeling game. Everything controls well. What else? I feel like my big issue with Chrono Trigger, because even though I agree that this is one of the best JRPGs of all time, and, you know, probably one of the best games of this era, period, I don't like it as much as most people do. And the reason is, it never really left me with as much of an emotional reaction in comparison to other games. So, the characters, the story, everything's great, but maybe it's because of me being younger and not paying attention to all the story or the character moments. I feel like I didn't get a whole lot out of the story. Again, it's perfectly fine. It's a really great story, actually. It's just, for me personally, I didn't get as much out of it as I think most fans did. That's why I've been meaning to actually go back and replay it at some point, except my backlog is so gigantic that I just haven't found time to go back and revisit games like this. There's also like 9 alternate endings, and they also added a separate ending that is supposed to tie into Chrono Cross for Chrono Trigger DS. So Chrono Cross was the spiritual successor / sequel. It's kind of weird. I haven't played Chrono Cross, to be honest, but it does have several elements from this game, and if I'm not mistaken, the bonus ending of Chrono Trigger DS does create a hook into that game, which is kind of cool. I feel like that's the one bit of DS bonus content that's like actually really neat and not as much of a grind as everything else. From what I've seen, again, I've never done it personally. But yeah, I think, you know, Final Fantasy VI, I really grew attached to that cast of characters, while in this game, the characters are still really, really good, but I didn't become as attached to most of them. But I can definitely see why people love this game as much as they do. I don't think this game is overrated at all, even though I don't see what a lot of other people see in it. For me, it's still like a solid, like, 8.5 to a 9. Again, my only real issue is I never became as attached to the story as most. But that's more of a me thing than the fault of the game, I'd say. But yeah, we just jump into a battle, no like transition into a separate battle screen. But yeah, we have the touch screen listing the enemies and our stats, but we also have a replica of the Super Nintendo menu on the top screen. But yeah, you have also a DS mode that has like more of the information on the bottom screen, and also touch controls. By the way, you can't actually use the touch screen to move around. I do not recommend doing that because I find it very imprecise. Story-wise, the main gimmick of Chrono Trigger is like time travel, like we're now in the past. That's what that teleporter was. Overall, I think, also, did I go over text yet? I don't think I did. So texts are your magic spells, and one neat thing you can do in Chrono Trigger is combine texts across different characters. So, for example, if a character has like a sword slash tech, and another character has like a fire spell, then you can get like a fire sword by using a dual tech, basically. There are even triple techs, I think. And that really incentivizes trying different combinations of characters to see what techs you like best. So another cool thing is, again, position matters. So if we target the right enemy and use Cyclone or new tech, we can actually hit all 3 enemies, ending this fight really quickly. So again, it's still a turn-based JRPG like a Final Fantasy, but it does a lot of things that make it feel a lot more dynamic and fast-paced, and I don't want to say real-time, because that's not quite the right term, but again, there's a sense of flair to the combat, I would say, that really helps. But yeah, this is definitely one of the better JRPGs to start out with. I would also recommend like Mario and Luigi and games like that as good entry-level games. But yeah, this is a pretty easygoing, like, you know, fantasy Squaresoft JRPG. And yeah, I'd say it's still worth playing. Again, even as someone who's like, yeah, I don't like it as much as most people do, I still think it's like a phenomenal game. Again, I just need to give it another shot to see if I can get anything more out of it beyond that first playthrough. Sometimes it happens where I need to give a game a second go to really enjoy it. Some games I come away liking less, so I assume, I feel like I would enjoy Chrono Trigger more with more experience. I do feel like, as someone who's getting into the genre, I did feel a little bit overwhelmed, but not too badly. Again, it's a pretty good entry level. It definitely would be harder for beginners than people who have played like a ton of Final Fantasy and know the ins and outs of the genre. Yeah, overall thoughts, the music is great, the visuals are great and hold up well, story is good, the writing, obviously you can debate whether the Super Nintendo or DS script is better, but yeah, overall the writing is really great too, like the characters a lot, and just yeah, it's a really good time. So on that note, I think I have rambled enough about Chrono Trigger for one video, so I am going to call things here for now. Maybe someday I'll come back to and try to do a full Let's Play, but who knows. Again, I feel like I'm just not really well qualified because, again, not enjoying it and having as much of a passion for this game as most people, but who knows. In any case, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next month for a new discussion.